Poland's had to scramble its air force after multiple Russian drones entered the NATO country. Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey said this afternoon that we are living in a new era of threat and that he was looking to see what help the British military could give to Poland to protect its airspace. Was this some kind of giant blunder by the Russians or a deliberate attempt to provoke NATO with all the dangers that involves? Let's talk now to Lord Simon McDonald, the former head of the Foreign Office. Lord McDonald, very good to have you on the show. This is the nearest Poland has got to proper war since the Second World War. It's quite a moment, isn't it?
It is, but it's a test rather than the beginning of World War III. I do not believe it was an accident. This happened in the context of a wider attack against Western Ukraine. Some drones strayed over into Polish airspace. I think that probably suited Russian purposes, but they were probing rather than attacking.
In terms of the response, because obviously that's what the Russians are interested in, I said it was the Polish Air Force, but actually Dutch aircraft were involved as well. In other words, this was an all-NATO response.
Of course. And the Poles have called for Article 4 consultations. So this involves the whole of the alliance. They haven't yet invoked Article 5. They're not looking for a collective security response, but clearly that's on the table.
At which point we turn to think about Donald Trump and what's going on in the White House. I don't know if you can help me to decode what President Trump has posted on his social truth media outlet. He said, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." What do you think that means?
Difficult to interpret, Andrew, frankly. Absolutely not standard diplomatic language. I note that it took him a whole 12 hours to come up with those two sentences. But it's true that all eyes are now on Trump and Washington. This is a test, and how the US responds to the test is most important. This should be the moment when America steps up at last and applies real sanctions to Russia.
And it's not the only probe that we've had, of course, because the British Council building in Kiev was hit by the Russians recently. Ursula von der Leyen's plane had its GPS jammed, probably by the Russians over Bulgaria. In other words, this so-called asymmetric warfare, this probe, push, is going on all over the place. To what extent do you think this is about trying to persuade European members of NATO not to send troops, not to send too much military equipment into Ukraine because of what might follow after that?
Whilst this is an escalation, I think all of the escalation so far has been contained. They're not looking for a hot fight against NATO. The Russians don't want that. But you're right. They are framing the conditions for when a negotiation starts between Kyiv and Moscow. And you're right again. The Russians want as small a European role in Ukraine as they can get away with.
So it's a kind of be very, very careful what you're doing moment. You mentioned earlier on, Simon, the sanctions. Like a lot of people, I'm slightly confused about where we actually are with the American threat of further sanctions. I mean, they could be very serious, but right at the moment, EU countries are buying a huge amount of Russian oil, even now, yes?
The sanctions have never been as complete or as punishing to the Russian economy as we've presented over the last several years. But there are sanctions that would penalize Russia. They are mostly in the energy sector. And these are the ones that should now be dusted down. Right now, the United States President Trump is punishing a country like India for taking Russian oil and gas more than he's punishing Russia for what it's doing in Ukraine.
Which is odd. And there's no real sign, is there, that the Russian economy is doing anything other than adapting itself to become a war economy. There's no real sign of collapse or hyperinflation or mass unemployment or anything like that.
The economy is not strong. A war economy is not a desirable state of affairs. They're creaking. When you're compiling economic statistics, producing tanks looks more impressive than producing cars. But the distortion within the economy over time applies greater strain. So I don't think the war is good for the Russian economy in the medium and long term.
And one final question about the view from Moscow, as it were, because obviously Vladimir Putin is a great games player and he's playing games here. But now the Russians have suggested talks with the Polish Defense Ministry about how to go further forward, which suggests to me that they don't want to provoke this further, push this further.
I would hesitate before claiming that, but I don't think they want to push it over the edge. I don't think they want a shooting war with Poland or NATO.
Another issue, if you don't mind, Lord McDonald, you were, of course, the British ambassador in Israel for a time. And tonight we have President Herzog of Israel meeting the Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Downing Street. Now, both of them have made statements about the other, which are pretty icy, pretty difficult. I'd just be fascinated to know, when you have two leaders who do not agree on something very substantial like that, what happens in these moments? Is it sort of backslapping and cordiality, however big the disagreement, or do these meetings from time to time become genuinely confrontational?
I think icy rather than confrontational. They are clearly allowing some of the atmosphere of the meeting to get out into the public, and both leaders have their reasons for doing that. But it's still important that they are meeting and they are talking. One of the oddest criticisms leveled against diplomats is that they meet. Meeting does not imply that you approve of someone. It means that you have business to discuss.
Mm-hmm. And you'd be surprised, I think, if I didn't ask you a question about Britain's current ambassador in Washington, Lord Mandelson. I'm not going to go into the whys and wherefores or what should happen to him or anything like that, don't worry. But I am interested in whether you think that there's a danger that this overshadows the incredibly important Trump state visit coming very soon.
It's not helpful, Andrew. Not at all helpful.
All right, Lord McDonald, I think that's about as much as I'm going to get out from you on that.